Welcome to Pizza Talk. I'm Peter Reinhardt, and today I'm here with Guy Frenkel, who many of you know, but many of you don't know. Guy, you may know him also by his sort of handle, CEOR, which is Israeli for sourdough. And if you do know the CEOR sites and on Instagram and Facebook and everywhere else, you've seen some amazing photos of breads that Guy has made not as a professional baker, but as a bread enthusiast, and he's pushed the envelope and he's influencing the bread community in a great way. So, Guy, welcome to Pizza Talk, and really want to just jump in this with you and have you bring us up to date a little bit on not only how you got here and the whole CEOR journey, so to speak, and which is really a sideline for you. You've got a full-time job, but then where it's going, and we want to. You're coming to us right now from Santa Fe Springs, just outside of LA, at a new bakery that you bought. And so what was just a hobby, CEOR, is now going to become CEOR Bakery. So, Guy, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Thank you, Peter. A real pleasure to be here. I'm a longtime fan and a student of your many books and teachings. So thank you. A real pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's a crazy story. It's an unplanned story. You said full-time job, and I guess the whole point is that it's not really ever a full-time job. I'm a filmmaker by profession. And if you know a little bit about the film industry, there's a lot of off time, even when you are working. And then it's also the kind of industry that there's a lot of in-between jobs. And in that gap, in those hours and days where I'm not working, or I'm thinking of a script or thinking of, creative thinking, but my hands are free, is where the hobby had room, to take root and grow and become a passion, and then become a very large portion of my life, and creative outlets. And so it morphed into something very unexpected. And as you just said, and eventually now here I am at an actual bakery.
In a facility that you just acquired that has not opened yet to the public,
No.
But it will be soon. So we'll hear more about that in a bit. But yeah, when you were saying that about being a filmmaker, I think the cliche joke is if you ask somebody from the film industry what project you're working on, they usually will say, "I'm between projects." And so in your between projects, you came up with a very cool hobby. You started, I think, I'm paraphrasing in my own words, what I think you did, you asked yourself, what are the limits of what bread can be? And how far can I push those limits? And that's what's so exciting, and I think why you've made such a big impact, on the bread and baking community, which is also affecting the pizza community and anybody who's really interested in food. So tell us a little bit about that, because you're not making a film right now. Now you're going full time into baking.
Sure. So again, that wasn't planned, and it wasn't the first question I asked myself. When I got into it, I was excited by all of the same things that draws many of us, especially not professional bakers, into baking. The making something with your hands, and the slowness of a real food movement, of the natural fermentation, but because I'm such a geek, because filmmaking is a multidisciplinary art, and you need to learn both about emotions and telling a story, a lot of artistic things, colors and composition, but also about lenses and about a lot of computer programs. There's a lot of learning if you want to be good at filmmaking. So I've spent my whole life learning. And when I got into bread baking, I did what I usually do, which was learn a lot. And I've read thousands and thousands of pages written by anybody that ever, including probably everything that you've ever written, right? And I remember seeing the epoxy method for the first time that you were writing about. And not only learning it, but also using that to imagine, well, what else can, what other things can we do? What other processes exist that are not necessarily the obvious ones? And so I've been on this continuous journey. At first, it was the book.
We're getting some Zoom glitches here, folks, so bear with us.
And then it was papers, peer review. I had questions. Is my reception bad?
Yeah, we're kind of catching and glitching here and there. Now we've lost you for a second.
I'm going to go off Wi-Fi and see if that helps. Is this better?
That's better.
Yeah. Sorry. So at first the books and the articles, and then I had specific questions that I couldn't find anybody writing about. So I looked for the scientific community and started finding a lot of peer-reviewed articles about enzymes and about the effect of salt on yeast and temperature. All of the questions I wanted to know, there's some amazing young dedicated scientist that spent a year or two of his life researching and writing a great paper. It's amazing how far it goes. I wanted to use passion fruit peel later on in my baking. And so somebody wrote about the food properties of passion fruit peel as a flour, and it's an emulsifier, and it's a shelf life extent, and all these wonderful things. Just Google is just an amazing gift to humanity in that aspect, right? Yeah. Information is out there.
But the thing is that you have to know what questions to ask, and you have to have the imagination and curiosity. And I think that, what happens to a lot of professionals is that you get so, caught up in making the business plan work and cranking out the product that you stop what got you there in the first place, that imagination and curiosity to get there, gets kind of overwhelmed by the operations. So you were essentially free to still pursue.
I was free. I was not. Look, I have a little bit of a pet peeve with the traditional baking schools, and I think, and I talk about it. I mean, obviously, we're dependent on the knowledge that they hold and share with the world. But for me, the stiffness of the focus on tradition is crippling. And what they end up many times doing is teaching you how to make the 20 or 30 or 40 hits, right? The baguette tradition and the brioche and the croissant, and even the customers, and then they send you out into the world to spend the next 30, 40 years making those products in different communities. And the big skill is that you can do it under different weather conditions consistently.
Yeah.
And it is a big skill, right? It is a big skill, but in my eyes, it's like they're cooks. They know, and imagine, instead of chefs, right? Imagine a culinary school teaching you how to make this one burger and this one schnitzel and this one mashed potato tradition. Don't change it, because then it won't be mashed potato anymore.
Right.
And then they send you out to make these 20 meals for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it's not that I don't respect tradition, and art is built on both respecting and learning everything that came before you, but then taking it further, right? So before Picasso could be Picasso, he had to learn how to paint realistically and learn about proper, perspectives and all of these things. And later he could take all of the tradition, add his own interpretation of the world, and then, create his thing.
That reminds me of a scene in 100-Foot Journey when the Indian chef has to make an omelet for this French woman, and she has a very specific idea of what an omelet should be, and that's how she decides who she's going to hire. And he makes an omelet, and he adds some Indian spice to it, and the omelet blows her mind, but she has a hard time admitting it. And she says, this omelet has been perfected for 200 years, and he says something like, well, after 200 years, don't you think there's time for some new ideas?
It's exactly that. And what she probably ends up in her head is, it's delicious, but it's not an omelet.
Yeah, yeah.
It's no longer an omelet because he added some spice. So don't call it an omelet and we're fine. That's a little bit the equivalent of the thinking in the very now, of course, I'm not working in a vacuum. I'm not pretending like this is a one-man movement, or it wouldn't have happened if I didn't pick up baking. I see it everywhere, right? There's professional bakers that are total chefs but the point is they have to go and acquire these skills elsewhere and develop, maybe if they've done beer fermentation and learned about enzymes and learned about, different things, or maybe they took some culinary classes, or just, they're just culinary inclined, and but the tools that I use when I bake, there's reducers and there's juicers and there's dehydrators. It's like every tool that a chef uses, I can't bake without them. I need them in order to create my breads.
Right.
It's more than mixing a flour or flowers with water and adding something to it.
Well, and anybody who's, wants to, again, have your mind blown, go and look up CEOR on, I guess Instagram. Is that the best place to see your photos?
That's the best. There's a
See
Facebook.
how, some of the incredibly innovative and creative work he's done, but you've been making those kind of in a one-off form, a few loaves at a time. Now you're thinking about moving into, an actual production facility and producing breads of that caliber for the public. What do you see the challenges to be for you in that going forward?
So, yeah, I mean, I've been working very much, and the whole, not just practically, but also philosophically for me, and very personal, I was working on very small scale. I wasn't selling the bread, or I want to say almost wasn't. If something came up, a potential client that I'm really excited about their work and their contribution to the work, if it's somebody I admire, an artist, or even a company that has brought me, joy or benefit, then sure, I'll go and play. But for the most part, I'm creating in my studio, very much like a sculptor would work with clay, 1 or 2 or 3 pieces usually, and I never make the same bread again. I'll just make one, and I don't plan in this. I mean, I'll plan a little bit of broad strokes, but then I go to the studio and I look at all the colors and I mix and I mill, and I don't write anything down the way you wouldn't when you draw a painting. You just paint it. And then sometimes it's the Mona Lisa, and it's better than all the other breads I've made before, and probably better than most breads I'll ever make after, right? And at those moments, I go, oh, shoot, I wish I wrote every little parameter and every little ingredient, so maybe I can try and replicate it. But a long time ago, I gave up on that, and I said, it's fine. You don't write like yesterday. And not every Beatles song is your favorite Beatles song, right? And they're all wonderful, and thank God they all exist, but we all have our favorites, and we all have the ones we wish that maybe they didn't have time to record, maybe.
I'll tell you a funny story. 35 years ago, when my wife and I were starting our little bakery cafe in Sonoma County, California, I knew that I wanted to make homemade breads as part of it. We weren't a professional bakery or anything, and I was not a professional anything. We were just kind of getting started. But I had this one bread that I'd been working on, and as we were building up to the opening day, I kept doing little tweaks on the recipe, and I kept mixing it. And one day, I had like a small, maybe 10-pound batch of the dough going in a Hobart. And I looked in the bowl, and the dough looked so beautiful that I knew that I had finally nailed it. And so I called my wife over and I said, Susan, you guys look at this dough. I've got it. And she looks at it. She says, how do you know? And I said, you can just tell by looking at this dough. It's just glowing. And this is the one. And so she asked the $1 million question. She said, did you write it down? And I went, whoa, can I do it a second time? So immediately we started to recreate. So at some point you gotta codify it. And I think that's one of the challenges for creative people, like you say, is can you take that one-off masterpiece and since you don't have a printer that you can just print it out over and over again, how can you replicate it day after day at that if you want to? And
that's right. So far I found joy in not doing that.
Yeah.
I thought it was exciting, and I liked that people said, oh, that one. Like people, my friends and family and people that get to enjoy my bread. And also it's a seasonal journey, right? I mean, I'm all the time incorporating stuff that I get from my farmer friends at the farmer market. And so the breads reflect the produce at the market the way a good restaurant should as well, right? So it's seasonal, but even within the season, if I have, for example, a chia loaf that I always come back to. But when I say come back to, I come back to the word chia. and I use chia as a main. I make the water first and let it gellify, and then I make the bread. That's the one element that I come back to: the flour composition, the hydration. Any other additives, I don't know. They
Yeah,
changed
yeah, yeah.
from.
And that's part of the creative process.
And I love that. But of course, now that I bought a place, I've spent the last month, for the first time in my life, baking different versions of the same bread again and again and again.
Yeah. Well, Guy, here's what I'd like to do. We're running out of time in this segment, and I want and invite all of you to come back and see segment 2, because we're gonna look at some photos from Bread Couture. When you were going to be a speaker at my bread symposium this year, and you were going to talk about, the topic was bread couture, and you've got some great slides to show us, and then you're going to give us a walking tour of the new bakery that you've just acquired.
How exciting!
CEOR. Now you're using your handle, so it's CEOR Bakery, in which you're going to be doing something that really is going to test, I think, your creative skills, which is to take pita bread, the simplest of all breads, and take it to another level. So we want to see all of that in the next segment. So folks, join us again. We'll come back in a couple seconds, and we're going to be back with Guy Frenkel, who's in LA, sitting in the office of his new CEOR Bakery, and we'll see you back here in just segment 2. We're back on Pizza Talk, and today we're here with Guy Frenkel, aka CEOR. And CEOR means what, Guy?
CEOR is the ancient biblical Hebrew word for sourdough, and the root represents the word leftover. So in the old tradition, they would keep back a small piece of the old dough and use it to ferment to the next day's dough. That's the leftover is called CEOR.
Interesting, which we call now sourdough starter, right?
That's right.
And we've been spending a lot of time on Pizza Talk talking about sourdough pizzas as sort of the next big thing that's happening in the pizza world. But today we're not really talking about pizza. Pizza Talk is really not just a celebration of pizza, but we always say on our home site, Pizza Quest, that Pizza Quest is a celebration of artisanship wherever we find it. And the bread community has been, one of the leading edges and has influenced greatly the pizza community in terms of taking artisanship into the pizza making, realm. And what you've been doing with CEOR and your baking up till now has been kind of pushing the envelope of what bread can be in a small scale. And now you're getting ready, and you're going to give us a tour in a few minutes of the new bakery you just acquired. But can you show us some photos from your bread couture, PowerPoint?
Yeah. So this is the PowerPoint that I originally built for your bread for the Future of Bread symposium that got canceled, unfortunately, this year.
And we're going to have you back. We're rescheduling everything for next year, obviously.
We'll do it next year, but I'll show you these slides briefly because I'm sure by next year we'll have fresh slides and more to talk about.
I'm counting on that. We're giving everybody.
The future is always ever changing and coming, right? So
exactly,
it will be a different future. All right, so let me turn this camera around so we can see my computer screen. And so what I mean by bread couture. And yeah, you said earlier in the previous episode that the question that guides me is what can bread be if it was fully realized, right? If you held nothing back, if you could use the most rare and amazing ingredients and take the time in preparation and maybe sometimes multi-stage preparation, if a fairy godmother would come and wave a wand and give you a Cinderella bread, what would that be?
Yes.
And the answer is multifold, of course. So, and then that's what this is a quick slide of my sponsors in case I say something nice about somebody, so you know that I'm
very nice.
And we talked briefly before about the traditional bread making, and I think robots are going to be doing it much better than us very, very soon, including in changing environmental conditions. Even though they won't have changing environmental conditions, they have perfectly controlled environments inside their little chambers. But putting that aside and going back to what couture means for me. One, I talk a lot and I work a lot with a huge variety of grains. A lot of them are locally grown, all of them organically, some of them already sustainably. But the point is, if David Miller introduced us to spelt many years ago, and slowly we have Khorasan or Kamut by its brand name creeping in, really we have a huge variety of amazing grains. I have a slide here with 3 different barleys, blue, purple, and black barley, and 3 different rye. So even within the word rye or the word barley, the wealth, the wealthness, the richness of what the farmers have to offer us is just incredible these days. And not to use it, I think, is a shame.
Hey,
And
Guy, let me ask you a question here. That loaf that we saw on the cover shot, that purple loaf of bread, was that made with purple barley?
oh, yeah, the color is not derived from purple barley, but yes, if I'll make a purple loaf, I will always use purple barley as a portion of the flour. As you can see, it's a two-tone. There's a more pinkish and a more darker
Yeah.
burgundy almost. One of them is from purple Peruvian corn. They
Oh,
make a drink from it. I forget the name of the sweet red purple drink in Peru, matcha, I want to something like that. And by boiling the purple corn, and so if you take the water from boiling the purple corn and you use that as your hydration, you get the most beautiful hues, but also you get that added cornstarch, which gives you this shine that you can see and
I
beautiful flavors. And the pink is derived from purple sweet potatoes. And when I say culinary and elaborate, what I do with the purple sweet potato is I roast them, I mash them, then I flatten them really like a millimeter or two on dehydrators, and I make crisps. And then I mill those crisps into a purple sweet potato flour.
wow.
At that
Wow.
point, you can rehydrate it and make purple mashed potato, or you can make the most delicious bread you've ever made with it, right? So that these two doughs are different aspects of purple, and these flavors work really well together as well. The corn and the sweet potato.
And with all this extra work you put into creating that loaf, we're not talking about your 4.95 sourdough now. But then I think this is where bread couture comes in, is that we're really talking about, what the market can bear also, where if people are willing to pay $8 for a loaf of bread, what's the ceiling for what they'll pay for a bread that has all this thoughtfulness put into it?
Yeah, I can tell you that these loaves in my head and in my world, where what I do is the starting price is usually $30, and then the most expensive loaf I baked was $720.
Wow.
And it had a gram of gold and a gram of silver, and it was baked not because I'm excited about putting gold in bread, but it was baked on request for a TV network that wanted to make a very posh bread, and they sent me the gold. It's edible gold leaf, but 8 jars of it to make a gram, right? And 8 jars of the silver to make another gram of silver. And
Wow.
so look, post-corona, this game isn't as fun as it was before. Before the pandemic, it was a lot of fun explaining why there's no reason not to shave truffles at market price the way into bread the way you do into spaghetti.
Yeah.
I see no difference between adding champagne, drinking champagne or making bread with the champagne.
Right.
But now I feel like it's a little, maybe some of these breads were pushed a little too far, but there's other principles that are much more accessible and scalable, and less posh, right? So more still design, still chefy, but less, doesn't depend on very expensive ingredients. I can show some more samples down here.
But
So
we know from seeing the movie Devil Wears Prada that that the designer clothing that goes for $2,000 is going to show up on the basement rack in 5 years from now for like $5.95 or whatever. So what you're
that's
doing is
exactly
really setting
true.
the stage for what's going to
That's
happen.
a great example. And a friend told me about Isaac Mizrahi when he first started in New York, and he was making the most outrageous, expensive, glorious pieces on the runway. But at the same time, and even my wife told me when I told her the story recently, she goes, still today, he makes these very, well, not boring. I don't know. I haven't seen them, right? It's all secondhand information, but women's suits.
Yeah.
Uh, at the department stores, and that's his bread and butter. But still, you can see a spark of his
Yeah.
creativity in there.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So I interrupted you while you were taking us through some of these slides, so I'm gonna let's get back on that.
So yeah, the next thing, more processed, unless this is not more expensive than other rye, but this rye was sprouted. And this, I can't remember what it is. It looks like maybe it's Sonora, but it could be anything at this point. Maybe, oh, maybe it's purple barley even. Look at that
Beautiful.
color. But
Yeah,
this was
these are beautiful
soaked
seeds.
in whiskey for 3 weeks. I soaked it in whiskey for 3 weeks, and then I flambéed it to get rid of the liquids, but retain all of the flavor. And they're soft at this point, and I just added them as an add-in, right? I folded into the dough.
Wow, I love that idea of flambeing your soaked grain. So, did the flambeing add a smoky quality to it?
It maybe a little bit smokiness, a little bit of a caramelization as you finish it off, of course. And but the main point is that I didn't want to drain any of the whiskey away. I wanted to retain all of the whiskey flavor, but reduce all of the moisture, so that this was a great way for. And I did the same thing with arak, which is an anise drink, based drink.
Arak, yeah.
Embarks the most amazing flavor into the final product because it's really soaked deep into the grain. You're not losing it, right? It's like stored in there. And since the grains are going in whole, you find it in the bite. It's waiting for you in the bite. These are Poilân's famous, well, my version of Poilân's famous butter cookies. I love that video of him making them by hand, but exploring different ancient grains, emmer and rye and Khorasan and einkorn and spelt and maybe bar and Sonora, I think is the last one. And the same thing with matzah bread, right? So the unleavened versions of these bread, still featuring the most amazing flavors and qualities of the ancient grains.
And this is really a big trend. I know as you're showing some of these ancient grains, is a big trend in the bread world and now in the pizza world as well, that people are using these heritage or heirloom grains that maybe they never even knew existed until recently. And suddenly now everybody's on board with the idea of, not only bringing these grains back, but also because they impart flavors that we maybe never have experienced before.
Flavors are amazing, and it doesn't have to be at 100%. I'm not a nature health food store, with that very acquired flavor of every bite saves my life, right? It doesn't have to be about that. Sometimes 5% of a roasted rye abruzzi that was locally grown, and you can full of impacts the most amazing chocolate chip cookie flavor and aromas to your dough at 5%, right? And so it's financially feasible, and also more accessible, because at 100% that rye abruzzi might not be for it. We know it's not for everyone, right? It's denser, it's very rich in flavors. So there's something about blending that makes it so you can still retain most of your dough qualities that you're used to while still playing the game of the end. This was a very extreme exploration of emmer. So Larry Kandarian grew emmer, and then Craftsman Brewing, he made wild emmer beer from it with wild yeast and bacteria. And then we dug up the soil where the emmer grew, and Beverly, who's a clay artist, made a cloche for us to bake in.
Yeah.
And then I used the beer with the yeast and bacteria from the beer and the spent grain, and I made emmer flour and made this loaf inside of the kiln that was made from the emmer soil. And we did all of that in the Museum of Arts of, what's the museum called? Folk, and we have like a folk and something museum here.
Well, is that a scorpion bread?
Well, no, this is one of her statues, because this was like a flyer from before we did it. But she made a cloche, like a very traditional, and actually, because we baked it in a kiln, in like a ceramic kiln in the museum.
Incredible.
It cracked a little bit, but I still have it just for, And then natural fermentation. You talk about the pizza world going through the sourdough revolution. And the point is, sourdough has many faces. It's not the old sourdough, San Francisco sourdough in a jar that we think about that makes sour bread. We can make sweet breads with natural fermentations, and we have the Italian mothers, and you can use ancient grains to create amazing pre-ferments and even liquids, right? I do a lot of work with yeast waters that I derive from
Yes.
fruits
Yes.
and from vegetables, and they have their own properties. I also talk a lot about the pre-ferment, and I should mention the guy that turned me on to this concept. Anomarel is an Israeli baking teacher. And he said a sentence that stuck with me and I've used ever since. The pre-ferment is like a magnifying glass.
Wow.
And if you have flavors or grains that you want to feature, but you're not using them in large quantities, ferment them early, right? Add them to your pre-ferments. If you're using a little bit of honey, adding it to the pre-ferment compared to the final dough will make a big difference.
That's an amazing photo there, because we really get to see the gluten structure and the amazing colors.
Yeah, and the colors obviously, you know, represent flavors, right? It's
yeah.
these are not just artificial dyes, but they come with and these are all the yeast waters, and as you can see, creates crazy fermentations. And basically everything at the farmer's market or in your backyard has some yeast and bacteria on it. Every fruit fly you come across, every bee, every flower that is edible, you can add sugar to, like a petri dish, and grow whatever life is on there, right?
Well, listen, Guy, I want to stop here because
Yeah.
I want to leave some time for the tour. But this has been a sneak preview of kind of the work that he's been doing and what he's going to be presenting at the International Symposium on Bread. If you want to attend next year, it's going to be virtual. Anybody can come from wherever you are, and Guy will be presenting. And if you're interested, sign up for the Pizza Talk mailing list so that we'll notify you on how to be able to get tickets when that comes. But you can see from these photos, and if you go to Guy's Instagram site, you'll see a lot of these breads, up close as well. But what I'd love for you to do now is take us now. You're in your next phase of your journey, which is you've bought a bakery. It hasn't opened yet. It's in Santa Fe Springs. It's just outside of LA. Can you give us a quick walkthrough just to give us a sense of what you're going to be doing there? Because I know that in addition to your breads, you're going to be moving into pita breads, which is
so Pizza Quest. I want to
cool.
say one thing. Don't get mad at me, but I have this theory that pizza is really a mispronunciation of the word pita.
I think you're right. I agree. I think the original term was P-I-T-T-A. I think it was a Greek term that meant a mess. A mess.
And and I think what the Italian did was take the pita that exists everywhere and just made it better by adding some, tomato sauce in addition to it. But really it comes from the same tradition and from the same kind of stiff dough so I find great correlation between pizza and pita, just as a caveat. And so for me, as I'm born and raised in Israel, I moved to the States when I was 23. And so for me, pita bread is the bread of my childhood. We eat it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We eat it at birthday parties with a chocolate spread inside. We eat it with eggs. We eat it with meat and falafel. And, it's the bread that for us goes with everything.
Is pita laffa bread a type of pita bread also?
It is, and more than that,
Israeli restaurants using laffa.
More than that, in a way, laffa. If you go outside of Israel and you talk about pita bread in the Arab world, or in the majority of the Arab world, the pita is rolled or folded. In Israel, we use the pita as a pocket. Exclusively as a pocket. We fill it up with things and it's thicker in order to be able to hold whatever you're putting in it.
Right.
And you have a good Israeli pita if it holds water. You can fill up the pita up to the rim with water and it will hold it, then that's
strong pocket.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah, wow. Now, you've been walking us through
okay, so let's go. So I'll show you a little bit before we run out of time. Loading down. So I've never had a mixer the whole part of my couture thing is that I've mixed everything by hand. Now I have 3, but they're really gentle. I've worked with them for the last month. It's fork mixers. They go at 60 RPMs, which means that they do a spin every second.
It's about as
So
close
they're
as
very
hand
gentle on the
mixing in a machine.
What?
It's about as close as hand mixing that you can get in a machine.
I was so happy to find that out. Yeah, I didn't have any experience with any mixes. All right, so let's talk about the pita. The main part is of the factory, or the reason I bought it really, is the pita line. I was excited about bringing good, honest pita to America and also teaching them how to use it right? The function of it. Because you guys always cut it in 4, and you take a quarter and you put it on the plate and you dip it in hummus once, but Seinfeld said don't double dip, so then you're stuck with it, and maybe you lift up a piece of chicken and you're not sure what to do with it. So I want to make a good one for you guys, and then I want to teach you how to use it. So this robot will lift up the bowl and throw it into this divider that will spout out 3 patties, and they flatten them a little bit just so they don't roll on the slopes.
Yeah.
And then it will rest in this proofing chamber from the top to the bottom and come out here and do a 90
So basically,
turn.
they're going to kind of go around and back and wind around and over about a 10 or 15 or 20-minute period.
That's right. They go like this.
And then by the time they get through that process, they've already started to ferment.
Yes, in the Israeli pita compared to the Lebanese, we want to retard that first fermentation, so we use colder water because our dough is a little more wet. And if it was both wet and fermented, it would probably get stuck in this machine. So I will test to see how fermented I can have it run through this machine before it disappears somewhere, and happened to me already.
Yeah, right.
But yes, it mostly relaxes, so it can. So then this machine can flatten it in 2 stages, first one way and then the other way. And there's little proximity sensors that push it out. But really, it's like a ship. Everything is a dial or a knob. There's no computer. It's just speed controls, if you want more time in fermentation. And then second fermentation chamber, very similar to the first one. It goes from the top shelf all the way to the bottom. In this one, because we've used colder water and because I'm going to use sourdough, this final fermentation is going to be much longer than usual, which is why I'm going to be able to produce less pitas than this machine is made for originally.
Yeah, because the fermentation of sourdough is much slower and longer, and everyone else is using yeast so that they can crank them out fast and do like 9,000 pitas an hour, and you're going to be able to do maybe 3,000.
Maybe 3, but I'm okay with that. It goes along with my, with the way I make bread anyway. It's not about the maximum amount. It's about making the better bread that I want.
Yeah, and this is going to be the value-added pita.
Yeah. And so then it goes into this magnificent 14-foot brick tunnel oven.
Wow.
It's got a German flamethrower burner at the back there. Because there's nothing like experience. That's a little Israeli joke about German burners. And then it comes out and to the conveyor belt and into a second room, which is huge, I know. And it goes up into the ceiling. It needs 20 minutes to cool before you can wrap it. So it goes up and around and it comes down. There's a little robot eye that will flip them if they got flipped over. Yeah. And they'll stack it however many you want in a package. And then there's 2 people here making sure that they're packed. Closed. Metal detector. I wasn't sure why there's a metal detector. Like, we don't have a lot of screws here. But then I've learned that Band-Aids in food factories have a little bit of metal in them. In case you lose it, the metal detector can find it, because otherwise there'll be a lot of regular Band-Aids.
There can also be, I know from having my bakery, that there can also be little bits of metal that can get into your flour or into your dough mixer or into your process that, you don't want anyone to have to bite into one of those things. And they're random. So it's good to have that detector there. My God.
There's a learning curve for me, for sure.
That's an amazing, that's a huge, quantum leap from the hand doughs that you've been making, totally by hand, and now you've gone into like Willy Wonka, Oompa Loompa land for your breads, and what a huge leap you're making. And when do you think you're going to be in production?
So first of all, yeah, you said Willy Wonka, and look, this thing came to me out of the blue. It wasn't a planned move. I wasn't at home writing a business plan about how I'm going to reinvent pita.
Yeah.
No, it was a total opportunity that came, and me and my wife came over and looked at it. And yes, I felt like I was walking into Willy Wonka's factory. And it's one of my favorite childhood books and movies. I wanted to be Charlie so bad, and find that golden ticket. And so, yeah, and let me just show you the other ovens. The guy had like a breadstick line but I'm going to repurpose because there's these, which I'm super excited about, right? So I've got these 4 pollen ovens.
Rotating rack ovens.
Rotating rack ovens with everything is ready, right? I just need to figure out what I'm going to make in here. I'm bringing in a 180-liter fermentation tank so I can do the sourdough, because I don't know I'm still not sure how to work on this kind of scale just using sourdough, but
it's going to be a learning curve. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of R&D and trial and error. Kind of like.
I'm very lucky that a lot of my friends, and I count among them, are some of the world's top industry leaders, from Craig Ponsford, who I phoned immediately up, a good friend of mine, Andy Clark, a mutual friend of ours, the folks at Ardent, the folks at the Sourdough Library, the folks at ProBake, these guys from Vegas, right? And the good friends of mine, Tyler, and all of a sudden I have 4 of their ovens. So I've been very lucky. My good fortune has been my friends, and they're stepping up and they're coming over and they're sharing their information the way bakers do. You know how generous bakers can be. It's amazing.
Well, this is so exciting, and hopefully when you are up and running and in production, we'd love to have you come back and maybe we do a show from and actually see the finished product coming out, which would be whenever that is, however long it takes you to get there. This has been an amazing journey. Before we end the show, before we run out of time, I'd love for you to share with everybody your work with Cast Your Bread, which is a whole new initiative that you got.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, for sure. Cast Your Bread. I registered the website a few years ago when I registered CEORbread.com, because I said if I ever do end up doing something commercial with the bread, I'll need to have a charity arm doing something, giving back to the community, especially if I'm going to be doing luxury, expensive bread, right? In my head, it was obvious. Put it aside, but then the pandemic came. And with the pandemic came hunger in my community to an extent that I've never seen before. And in response to that, a lot of new charity organizations popped up to try and combat that hunger. And these organizations provide food packages for families, different audiences. Some are just anybody, some are for certain neighborhoods, some are for undocumented immigrants that lost their jobs and have no other safety net. And I was sitting on all of these bags of flour in my garage, like maybe 7 50-pound bags I had when this started. And at first I felt like a prepper. I felt so good and secure, right, in my flour.
Right.
Immediate. And then it felt like maybe there won't be any more flour ever again for a second. And I wanted to like there was an instinct of herding it, right? And making sure that you have enough hoarding for your family.
Yeah.
For a second, that was my instinct. And then Ardent phoned me and said, Guy, we're working. You're not going to run out of flour.
And Ardent, of course, for those who don't know, is like the largest flour mill in the world, and based here in the United States. And you've connected with them.
They've been sponsoring my flour needs for over a year. They recognized something in me. They wanted to play. And so they said, Guy, we'll be shipping it to you in the mail if we need to. You're not running out of your you know, it's a few hundred pounds. I'm not a bakery. It's not a pallet that they're sending over. And then I was like, okay, well, there's flour. I've got this incredible superpower. I can mix this flour with water and salt and make food. And
Yeah.
that's crazy, right? Like take 50 pounds of flour and make 100 pounds of food for people. And so I was like, it's time to do cast your bread and start baking for the needy. And the first time I did it alone. The second time I reached out and said, who wants to join me in the Los Angeles bread bakers community? And 2 people joined me. And now, almost 2 months later, there's 3 or 4 chapters across the United States. We have about 20 or 30 bakers in our chapter. There's a second chapter here in town serving the South Side, providing 200 loaves every 2 weeks for a second organization. They reached out from Peru and from Australia. They want to open more chapters. So it's just been so heartwarming and so amazing to see people have the same instinct that I had that said, we can bake, somebody else is hungry, let's share the bread. Ardent came and sent a pallet. They sent a pallet of a ton of flour for us. So I distribute the flour to the bakers and then they return. And also a lot of the local growers, farmers gave us grain. I mill it for my bakers and I send them home with some fresh milled whole wheat flour and some organic white flour and hundreds of loaves every week here in town and elsewhere in Baltimore and Miami.
Yeah. I've seen photos on the various Cast Your Bread websites, because now there's a number of them, and where you just basically, it's like an open stall area, like at a market, a farmer's market, with bread just put out there with pretty much if you need one, take one signs, which is pretty amazing.
Totally, except it's not just bread. What we did that I thought was clever is that we teamed up with these charity organizations that make a whole food package, and we add the bread to that. So somebody donated eggs and somebody donated vegetables and even a roll of toilet paper when that was scarce. And we added a fresh baked sourdough loaf with organic, with some fresh milk baked to that package, and it lasts a week, the whole package.
Wow.
Because I don't know how to find the poor people or distribute. I don't have those kind of organizational skills.
Yeah.
So we're piggybacking on the other organizations that are doing that groundwork, and we're supporting their efforts.
Well, that's phenomenal. So basically, you're kind of synergizing, all these various services. So I'm just really excited and honored that you're doing that work, and it's going to be already. I'm talking to a local bread baker here who's just getting it. They haven't opened yet. They're in the same stage as you. They're building it out right now, and but they said we really want to have a giving component. And I started telling them about Cast Your Bread. And they said we heard about it, and they said, well, why don't you talk to Guy and you can set up a chapter in Charlotte, And
I want to say this, Peter. It's so easy. People reach out every now and then. I'm so thankful. It's so easy to set up a chapter, right? We have no rules. There's no. I don't want anything from you. Basically, give me your address. I send you a bunch of stencils with our logo, and then you go do you and find your charity, find whoever people you want to support and help, with their hunger issues, and off you go. And whatever support we can lend, awesome, but there's no limitations or anything that makes it more difficult.
It's incredible. What a journey from bread couture to bread for the masses, to pita bread, to giving away and serving those in need. Guy, it's been quite an adventure you've been on for the last few years. You're not only writing films, you're living a film. You are Charlie in Willy Wonka land, and congratulations on all the things that are happening. And we definitely want to get you back when you're up and running, so we can show people the not only the breads, but I want people to see how you're pushing again. You're creating a new sort of category of what pita bread, the possibilities of pita, and so it's going to be fun to watch you. And anybody who's interested in having a chapter of Cast Your Bread, you can go to Cast Your Bread. Just look it up on Google, look it up on Instagram, and there's various chapters. Write to me at peter@pizzaquest.com, and I will connect you with Guy to get those stencils and everything else. Guy, thanks so much for sharing all this information. There's great photos, this knowledge, and as I always say, may your crust be crisp and your bread always rise.